afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to the second half of Data Science Festival, May Day. I hope you're feeling inspired by the fantastic sessions that we have had so far, and I hope you had an amazing lunch as well. Before moving on, I have an announcement to make. After today's last session, we'll be networking downstairs at Space Bar from 5 to 6 p.m. For our next session, we have a real treat in store for you. We'll be dwelling into the world of data analytics with the talk titled 7 Tips to Ensure Your Data Project Succeeds. Our esteemed speaker for the next session is Nicola Osinaike. She is a founder of Audit Data Hub, which is a dynamic startup that provides training in data analytics, especially for beginners. She graduated as a mechanical engineer and started her career in the aerospace industry and quickly pivoted into the IT industry. Please join me in welcoming Nicola to the stage, everyone.
Hello, all good with sound? Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Thank you for joining me, and I hope you're enjoying the Data Festival so far. So just very quick intros. My name is Nicola Osinaike, and how I was introduced, I'm the founder of Audit Data Hub. So my background, I think, is quite eclectic. So I was a mechanical engineer. I then moved into digital transformation, IT consultancy, and also product management. And I'm also a chartered IT auditor. Now, I've been fortunate enough to work across all three sectors, and I've worked with tech teams, operational teams, up to the C-suite, across all three sectors. Now, the business context that I've worked in are very different, but there are a lot of similar patterns that I'm seeing in all of the places I've been in. Now, stats say that potentially 85% of data projects are deemed a failure. And this means that the outcomes are missing stakeholder expectations around delivery, time, quality, and scope. And many firms are spending vast amounts of money on data-related applications and services, yet this is often creating underutilized technology, and with business value that is not visibly showing up in the balance sheet. Now, my aim today is definitely not to offend the data community, but I wonder how many of you sitting here today have spent weeks building a data solution or model convinced it would absolutely add value. Maybe it promised to halve business costs and double productivity. Yet, weeks after go live, that same tool is covered in metaphoric cobwebs, while users continue with their old processes and create even more complicated workarounds, all in the attempt to avoid that shiny new tool. Now, the reasons that data projects fail are well documented, let's be real. Yet the problem continues, so I really believe that there is something deeper going on here. So, to all aspiring, developing, or master data professionals here today, I really believe that we can help to reverse these stats. But how? Well, all will be revealed over the next 25 minutes or so. I will share 7 practical tips on how that you can help ensure that your next data project is a success and beat those really concerning odds. So let's start with tip number 1. Solve the right business problem with defined measure of success. Now, depending on your experience within companies, many leaders are simply unaware that the business challenges that they aim to resolve by utilizing data are far more complex than they actually recognize. Generally, everybody wants to use the power of data to predict and to drive decision-making, perhaps analyze volumes of unstructured text to find trends and patterns, or automate manual tasks like report writing and content generation. But specifically, what business process do they want to improve, and what is the measure of success? And it's this part that is often harder to pin down, increasing the odds of your project failing. And with no clarity around how the data solution will be utilized and how that action will be turned into business value, it means that the project objective isn't clear and the solution is more likely to lead to disappointment. Now, data professionals need to be aware that business leaders can hold very idealistic views around how their organizations really operate. Their assumptions could be shaped by distant observations and past memories. They can too easily accept those really shiny, perfected reports reported to them by managers, potentially not fully reflecting the true reality on the ground. And it's this lack of operational honesty which can make it easy to believe that simply utilizing a data solution will make everything better, all by itself with no further input. And this assumption is rarely said out loud, but it's exactly what is happening often in practice, when really there is almost always a people or organizational cultural element contributing to the problem. So, instantly, your key stakeholder holds false expectations on what is achievable. Harder still is when there are different expectations around the project outcomes. Different people can assume things they haven't even told you about. They may be thinking, well, we can just press a button and by magic this admin report will just pop out. Clearly that's ridiculous, but with all these different expectations on the table, it can be even harder to deliver something that satisfies everyone. So what can you do to ensure that your next data project solves the right business problem? First, remember, in the world of data, certainty is rarely available. So agility and experimentation is key. But if you at least start with some smart objectives so that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, you at least have something concrete to start with. And here are a couple of examples of good and bad objectives. So we've got the first one. So use machine learning to increase sales by 15%. But how? Next, use chatbots to improve call center productivity. In what way? And a couple of slightly better ones. So to use AI to drive personalized recommendations to increase the average order value by 15% within 6 months. Or to use chatbots to reduce the average customer query response time by 50% within 3 months. So these are specific and they give you something to measure your success by. It may feel a little bit rude to push leaders to think through what they want, why they want it, and how it will add value. But this is where those soft skills really come into play. Persuasion and influence are key. Perhaps encourage stakeholders to seek advice if they don't know. The project really needs to start out with a clear project objective. So I've touched on skills briefly, so I'll move on to tip number 2. And that is to have the right talent in the right place at the right time. So the critical thing here is that at the moment there's kind of widespread misunderstanding on specific skills that need to be deployed and when. So this is a very basic example of the data project lifecycle. So you've got the key stages: definition, investigation, cleansing, MVP, and ops support. And there are a range of common roles. So you've got product owner, data scientists, data engineers, system engineers. And beneath each of those roles are a specific set of skills. Now, often discussions around sourcing talent are focused on those technical areas, so build, deployment, support, which is logical, right? So without these technical skills, such as the ability to build models, to build algorithms, to manage the IT infrastructure, data projects will go nowhere. But there is often a failure to utilize a range of other really vital skills at the right time, such as business analysis, process design, basic data literacy training, and business change. And this is part of the reason so many data projects are failing. Many across the majority of the working population lack basic data literacy skills. And that is just the ability to make sense of data in context across a range of scenarios. And depending on your background, the ability to make even basic business decisions by analyzing really simple data sets can be really difficult for some. And it's these same individuals that are then tasked with being data project stakeholders. And they may lack the foundational knowledge of the relationship between data, business operations, and decision making. And as a result, project objectives are vague. How business value will be created is even vaguer. And the work to prepare users to adopt the tool gets overlooked. It's then left to data scientists to fill the gap, which is pretty unrealistic because the skill for this kind of stuff is completely different to data science skills. So what do business process designers do? Well, they make sure that the business process is efficient, and without it, you're just putting in a new data tool with an inefficient process. Is it feasible that a data tool should deliver productivity with nothing else changing? Probably not, if you think about it. So in summary, if these people are engaged at an earlier stage, it will support the optimal way of working when you actually design your tool. And often, what happens in real life is that when the data project is complete, there's a few emails and a one-day training course at the end. And when you've got very complex business processes that are interlinking, this is rarely sufficient. And this is what leads to this kind of not meeting stakeholder expectations, in my view. So what can you do to ensure that your data project has the right talent at the right time? So as data professionals, just be curious about these other roles. There could be people in your organization that are already doing this work, and maybe you can try raising this with your leaders. Or simply ask, how do we know that this solution is actually going to be adopted by users? Are we just making assumptions that they will be and kind of crossing our fingers? Or what did staff actually say they needed to help them be productive and to help them make more decisions? Just talking to them can bring a whole new lease of life to your data solutions. So the next tip is to move on to having access to the right data. Now, quite clearly, without data, there is no data project. So what does having the right data even mean? Well, the explanation largely covers 5 characteristics. So you've got relevance, so that's, does the data directly support the project objective? You've got accuracy. Is it complete? Is it accurate? And is it reliable? No gaps. Is it timely? Is it up to date and available when needed? Is it consistent? So is it in a standardized format and structure? And is it accessible? So is it easy to retrieve and use in reality? Now, anyone out there involved in a data project which relies on legacy IT, I'm sure you will look at that list and wish that that is the data that you had access to. And it was the data that you were asked to create some amazing, usable insights. In my experience, it never looks like this, but you might be lucky. And especially with very old systems, the data created within them was never designed to be used in the way that we want to use it today. And basically what's happening is trying to make this kind of data work for the objectives that we have today is starting to look like trying to shove a square peg into a round hole. And here are some of the challenges that this presents. So in relation to data relevance, so to use past data to accurately predict the future relies so much on that past data being stored as digital information. And commonly, when business processes are either disjointed or there is a lot of things that go on which are non-digitized, some of the data that you need for prediction is actually missing. So that creates poor training data. And in relation to accuracy, so not all systems have working data validation. So this could mean that you've got restricted access to those that can either enter or edit. And perhaps there are reports or processes that can quickly identify and correct data errors, or field validations, which forces users to auto-correct before they save. Now, the problem is, if these controls aren't actually working, you can't really rely on the data that it's creating. And again, all this is doing is creating poor training data. And as the saying goes, garbage in equals garbage out. So in relation to consistency, this challenge features really highly where organizations work in silos. You may find that different teams are doing really similar tasks, but they're using completely different systems and capturing data in completely different ways. Then the business wants to analyze and combine data sets to extract trends and patterns, creating an instant problem. It's so much harder to compare and contrast non-standard data across the organization. And you may find that there is no unique reference field to anchor your analysis, or the same fields use very different formats. Again, all this is doing is creating poor training data, which any model needs desperately to deliver a reasonable level of accuracy. So I've touched on 3 of the right data characteristics, but collectively they present, the challenge that they present is false expectations around the level of accuracy that is possible with the data that's actually available. So, what can you do to ensure that your next data project has access to the right data? So to reiterate my first tip, ensure there is a clear objective. What business problem are we aiming to solve here, rather than what cool tech are we trying to create? It's also advisable to seek guidance from operational teams to plug any gaps in your business knowledge. When you're thinking about, is this data right or do I need more? You'd be surprised how different the data is when you're presented with it than the way it's described. So I would always encourage you to get a sample of it, look at it, play with it, and kind of ask questions to make sure that it is the data that you think it is. So we've covered skills and data, but what about managing the project itself? I'll move on to tip number 4. So applying the right structured delivery methodology. So the way that data projects are delivered varies wildly across organizations, with many named methodologies for us to all follow. Maybe agile is king. Perhaps it's waterfall that just will not go away. Or it's the timeless ad hoc method. Either way, there is always some requirements gathering at the start, and then some user adoption effort towards the end, but yeah, normally it's pretty much at the end. The problem is that these named approaches, whether an in-house build or a procurement off the shelf, often overlook the need to redesign new business processes and proactively manage the business change. Worse still is that often the planned budget don't actually account for this kind of work, which makes it even harder for the delivery team, even if they know that this stuff needs to be done, because it's really hard to deliver work when it's unfunded. Yet, business process redesign and business change both maximize the odds of delivering a data project which is highly utilized and delivers quantifiable benefit. So, what is that in plain English? That is real reduced costs. That is actual productivity gains, which actually show up on a balance sheet somewhere. So another challenge is the claim that a data project is being delivered using a specific methodology, but it's in name only. So let me explain. So maybe it's the agile methodology, which includes stand-ups, sprints, and backlogs. But there seems to be a strange low level of stakeholder engagement, which instantly kills your feedback loop. Or the waterfall method, labeled as agile. You know what I mean. Everyone says they want agile delivery, but they want certainty, an end-to-end plan, and they reject any suggestion of an MVP. When the talent isn't available to ensure that data projects really operate under a structured delivery methodology, it's hard to maintain control, increasing the chance that your stakeholder will be disappointed and the project will be deemed a failure in their eyes. And with a more fluid approach, what you tend to get is scope creep. So the project aim at the start of the project morphs into something completely different towards the end. Or you get low performance, so your progress is slower than expected with no clear reason as to why or any real awareness of the overall impact. You get higher costs. The projected costs seem to only go in one direction, up, with no ability to stop it. You get poor risk management, so problems just seem to crop up unexpectedly, and there seems to be a need to manage everything reactively. There's a lack of governance. So the budget holders just don't know what is going on until it's far too late. Now, all of these factors play into major disappointment, leading stakeholders to assess that the very expensive data project is deemed a failure from their perspective. So what can you do to ensure that your data project uses the right delivery method? And to reiterate tip number 2, you need to ensure that you have access to the right mix of talent. For this one, this is about having defined project management abilities. It may be even worth considering individuals who don't have a tech background. They may bring a whole new perspective to the table, which a room full of technologists may not even have considered. So at the start, I referenced a failed data project is relative to stakeholder expectations, which nicely segues into tip number 5. Oh, there's a wrong title there, sorry. So this is about steering stakeholder expectations towards reality. Sorry, I've just seen the titles wrong there. Humans often decide that something is successful based on the way it makes them feel. And it's not always definable terms. So emotions are really hard to reliably satisfy. Now, I personally think that there are aspects of AI which are just overhyped. In general, there is a lack of understanding around how it works, how intelligent it really is, and its reliance on accurate data. So to manage expectations, truthful communications around the limitations of your data project are essential. Now, I appreciate if you're in a sales role, this approach may not help your bonus, but it's this inaccurate communication which is largely at the root of this dissatisfaction problem. Honesty can really help to build stakeholder trust, better manage expectations, and increase the probability of project success, and even follow on business if you are in sales. So another point to consider is having a clear idea of your stakeholder expectations. And this makes it easier to target resources in the right place. You're really aiming to deliver what makes them happy, as well as deliver business value. And knowing your stakeholder expectations can also help you manage the project risks before they crystallize. So if your stakeholder group are disengaged with your project, there is a chance that you're going to have a problem with adoption when you go live. So knowing about that earlier on makes it easier for you to actually do something about it. Just the last point I want to touch on here is about managing the egos of budget holders. So like us, they are all human, right? But they are critical to any data project. They can make or break it. And sadly, budget holders can sometimes allow their egos to influence their actions, which can impact decision-making, resource allocation, and project outcomes. So by taking steps to manage their egos, you ensure that decisions are objective rather than based on personal preferences. And done well, managing budget holder egos improves delivery team cohesion as the tension from above is significantly reduced. It makes it more likely that delivery flexibility will be embraced as resistance to change starts to go down, and they may be even more willing to take accountability for the right project risks, which is important because when stuff goes wrong, you probably need resources to help you manage it. So what can you do to actively manage expectations and egos on your next data project? Well, you can deploy active listening and empathy in your communications. It builds rapport, and you may gain a greater understanding of what they're really looking for. Be transparent about project progress, the challenges you're facing, and decisions. This again builds trust and reduces ego-driven assumptions. Focus on data, facts, and project objectives, and move away from personal preferences. How about acknowledge that the budget holder has expertise and contributions that you don't have? Have you ever thought that for these kind of people, sponsoring a new data solution may be so outside their comfort zone? So boost their ego a little bit and thank them for their insights and involvement. So that's expectation management covered. I just wanted to briefly touch on data ethics. So data ethics, as we all know, is a very hot topic at the moment. And many companies are making ethical decisions around AI and data with commerciality at front and center. When its use breaches the current societal expectations in the absence of enforceable regulation, this can lead to reputational damage and potential legal issues. There are many high-profile examples to demonstrate how wrong companies can get this. So, a few examples. So, a while back in the US, they designed a healthcare risk prediction algorithm which was used widely in US hospitals, and it was found to vastly underestimate the needs of black patients due to its false assumptions. Or there was the sexist Amazon hiring tool, where it was found to be gender bias. That was pretty embarrassing. And there's also facial recognition generally. It has led to so many wrongful arrests, especially in the US, due to mistaken identity, because it is shown to work less on darker skin. Now, these examples probably had inefficient oversight of the solution in the first place, making it harder to obtain feedback and proactively identify hallucinations before they went full gung-ho into public rollout. So what can you do to ensure that your next data project doesn't create unexpected consequences? For sure, ask the widest range of people from different backgrounds to provide feedback on your solution. Simply asking a few people that are exactly like you is not going to cut it. You need to do some checks to make sure that there aren't any ethical considerations you should be thinking about. Now, let's be real. Companies all have different risk appetites, but you could do your best to raise the alarm. So the last point before some Q&A I wanted to cover was company culture. So there is a saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Has anybody heard that saying before? Not really. Okay, cool. So company culture is a really complicated topic. We could be here all day talking about it. But it briefly summarizes a company's behavioral norms, their leadership influence, and their ability to change, which essentially permits itself across the organization. Therefore, organizational culture can directly influence the success or failure of your data project. But why? Well, the speed that the old ways of working can be changed to actually utilize a data tool is related to its culture. The level of leadership support to encourage the use of new technology is again related to its culture. The presence of siloed data and the lack of standardization exists purely because the culture supports this way of operating. And changing the culture of an organization is really hard. And data professionals alone are unlikely to possess the superpowers to do this all by themselves. So what can you do to ensure that your data project doesn't fail due to an incompatible company culture? Be curious, again, this is a really key one, and ask probing questions about how an organization typically reacts to change. What is their approach to data utilization and new technology in general? Do they embrace it? Do they shun it? Do they shun it? Knowing these things could really help you plan. And if you know that people regularly embrace change and they welcome new technology, your data project is more likely to be a success. Now, if the reverse is true, more work is going to have to be done with the business change to ensure that the way that the system is designed is used in the way it's intended. So, just to summarize, here are my top 7 tips for how you can ensure that your data project is a success. Number 1, agree smart project objectives and just encourage the stakeholders where you can to think about how that final solution will be practically used to deliver business value. Tip number 2, ensure the project has access to non-technical skills, especially those that relate to process design and business change, to ensure that they support the solution adoption. Tip number 3, look at some sample data and seek advice to plug any gaps in your business knowledge. Tip number 4, ensure that you have access to the talent with structured project management skills. Number 5, manage budget holder expectations and egos with honesty and empathetic communications. Number 6, avoid ethical consequences by seeking feedback from the widest range of people that you can. And tip number 7, be curious about the organizational culture to assess what more needs to be done to secure project success. So I really hope those 7 tips will help in some way and help ensure that your next project bucks those really worrying trends. Thank you so much for listening. Are there any questions? silence. Oh, sorry.
I was just thinking about scope creep that you mentioned. And there's two things that I associate with that, and I wonder if you agree. One is sometimes it can be a lack of clarity about what the requirement is, and it involves more work than you originally think. But another is that the user wants to do some extra things. And in an agile environment, that should be part of the negotiation, and you should make it clear that if you want extra features, that's going to incur cost. Mm-hmm. Is that a reasonable summation, would you say?
I think that's fully correct. I think that the tricky thing is, in an agile environment, that scope creep is part of the process. So it's a kind of quantified sprint, and we're going to move on to the next sprint and so forth. I think the trouble is when the organization is saying agile, but they really mean waterfall, then you're given a fixed budget and a fixed time, and it isn't agile at all. So I think you kind of have two methodologies working at the same time. So I think in those instances, you're never gonna get everything fully tied up to begin with. But I think it's just, as I said, just maintaining the communications. And often, because we're not asking enough probing questions, we don't realize how much they're assuming. So then when it gets to the end, they become disappointed because what they thought was happening wasn't actually the case. So I think you're right, it's part of the nature of it, but it's about what the stakeholder thinks is reasonable. Is that okay?
Does anyone have any more questions?
There's one down there.
Thank you. Very interesting talk, and very useful. I did have two questions, but then the gentleman kind of covered one of my questions, so kudos to that. And then the second question I have is actually the project management. So when you mentioned in the step 2, involve the right people at the right time, I always have that questions because in my work experience, you often kind of don't involve the right project management resources, as in you probably it is a data project for project manager, but if you dive to a degree, as in you get deep enough to the business challenge, you realize after like 1 or 2 POC, you realize that it's actually maybe not portfolio, maybe not program, but like portfolios of a level challenge, and sort of like how do you embed that kind of like project management into the sort of like whole process and scale up and down sort of like throughout the process? Thank you.
No, that's fine. Thank you. I'm trying to think how best to answer your question. I think that the principle of project management skills it's a discipline in its own right, and I think that the challenge is, especially when it comes to data projects, the assumption is that the tech people can just do it. And there is an assumption that because you are a technical person and you're in a technical role and you're in a technical project equals you have project management capability. So I think, just to reiterate what I'm saying, I think it's about being curious about what those other roles are and actually speaking up and going, well, we have a lot of tech people, but we don't really have anybody that is a project manager that knows how to frame a project, govern a project, liaise with stakeholders, etc. And I think often, like I said, with the budget, that doesn't always cover it. So I think it is about just at the beginning, just being very clear. Maybe we need more than just data scientists in the room. What other skills could be useful and why? And then I think it's just kind of broadening it out to kind of dipping into those specific skill sets. But I think the thing we have to challenge is that data scientists cannot do absolutely everything. And I think, like I said, there's been such a focus on the technical talent because without it, projects go nowhere. But I think we're overlooking all of the soft skills, which is leading to the fact that so much of this tech is going underutilized. So I think it's more just be aware that it's actually a discipline in its own right and just take steps to plug that gap. Is that okay?
Hi, thank you for that. I found it really useful. I just wanted to ask about small projects. So where maybe you've got very, very small companies, or you've got maybe freelancers working on significant projects for organisations, but what would you, is there anything that you can add to that would be appropriate for small projects? I'm thinking specifically about the talents. How do you get those people in, and how do you make sure they've got enough time to do it properly?
So obviously time equals money, which is always the problem. So I think, especially if you're on a very small project, that there's always pressure to kind of deliver benefit fast. But I would say you'd probably invest more in the understanding of the business problem, understanding of how people are going to use it, invest more in that than the actual bells and whistles technical solution, because actually you can have a fairly average data solution. It might not do everything, but knowing exactly how users are going to use it and how it's going to make a difference to the business is going to be worth far more. So I think obviously you do, I'm saying these things in terms of, you need structure and you need to have the right talent, which is not always easy with small organizations, charities, and very small projects. But where you can, just lean into people that understand the business, use the people on the ground that know what they're doing, they know where they've got the challenge and what they need to make it better. Once you fully understand that, chuck it over the fence and give it to the data scientist. But I think you just need to make sure that you understand the business problem in the first instance. And like I said, there is such an assumption that this label data scientist can just do absolutely everything, and I think it is not helping the situation. So just invest more in the maybe people that, and the people that you need are probably in your organization, so just lean on them more. It's probably harder to get consultants in, but just lean on the people that understand the business, extract it, and then just give that to the data scientist to create a solution. Is that sort of helpful? Okay.
Are there any more questions? Okay. Thank you, Nicola, for such an amazing session.